history on this issue. I think we provided you some information on the history of this issue. It is within your prerogative to determine whether or not any employee is a civil service employee or a non-civil service employee. The reason why we want this position to be a non-civil service is because it is a new business. We believe that from a long-term strategic perspective, it makes sense for us to no longer have that civil service requirement for the purposes of both hiring and for disciplinary action as we move forward. So we're still on the same page where staff is recommending that you approve the position as non-civil service. All employees at OMU have an opportunity through the disagreement policy, disagreement procedure that we have in our employee manual, that if there is an issue that they disagree with management on, they can appeal it through up the chain of command and ultimately to this commission for a hearing. And as anything that the Civil Service Commission would normally rule on relative to disciplinary action or employment, you have the same rights. Ultimately, that employment issues are your responsibility and your authority at OMU, not mine. We can recommend employees, we cannot terminate them, we cannot hire them, nor can we accept retirements without your approval. That's why you see those on the agenda each month. So with that, Michael, is there anything else you want to add?
Tony, you had mentioned a couple things about what the city had done, and in looking at the classifications, you understand the civil service and the process that's afforded there from a due process perspective. Then you have the rest of our employees, or which what we call employment at will, which means we can disposition those employees, hire and terminate at will with them. And basically, we have a lot of our policies and procedures within the company that kind of warrant how we do that. That we're an equal employment opportunity provider, that we do not have what I call workplace discrimination, but we can let those employees go. And as long as we're not discriminating against them based upon Title VII coverage like sex, religion, age, those types of things, or any federal or state guidelines, then we have that flexibility to scale up and down as we see fit. Some of the provisions I think you were looking for is potentially taking that exempt population or non-civil service population and giving them some form of civil service protection, whether it's inside civil service, because that's what the city does. They have 3 classifications, and I'm not really sure how that would work. We can talk to Pat about that as far as giving or granting this position some form of civil service protection rights. But there are options on the table to discuss on that. But keeping employment at will is something I would definitely recommend. And from a hiring, and like Terry mentioned, from a hiring and a termination perspective, every single one of those positions is reviewed by management, director, general manager, and if there's an issue, legal counsel, and then of course can be discussed with you in closed session if we have one. And I've been here 7 years, and we've had 3 dispositions on exempt employees, 2 job eliminations, and 1 performance issue. But that's just kind of, I wanted to explain a little bit to make sure everybody understood that, kind of how we're broken up with civil service and that.
You know, Terry and I that said that we want to move to not having more non-civil service. So we have a systematic plan to move everybody to non-civil service.
No,
Well, if we exceed that, then why don't we?
I apologize for misunderstanding.
Oh, maybe I misunderstood.
Our goal is that the telecom business itself would not have any civil service for the other businesses, the water and electric business.
Continue business.
Businesses.
I guess that was one of the things that was kind of revealed, that we had paths and stuff like that. We had all the technicians, all sorts of technicians, and they were intentionally left out of sort of that little population. Sometime in the past.
Well, those were civil service positions.
Right.
Yes,
So, I mean, when the big reclassification and the opportunity, because I mean, everybody was, civil service at one time, right, except for.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
They were.
And then at some point, there was a bunch of reclassification there, but the technicians were sort of, seemed like the line at which it was drawn, to me a little bit, the job classification. So this is technician. I mean, is it, so we're gonna have technicians in some business units that are
Civil service and in the telecom, we're recommending it. And again, that's within your purview.
Yeah, you're talking.
I just don't know where that's going to separation. The telecom still falls under the electric umbrella. It's not really a separate, you can say it's a new business, but it's not separate from electric.
Well, it's authorized under the statutes that allow us to operate an electric utility. But as I've mentioned to you in the past, to the extent that we're successful in building that business, especially the fiber to the home business, and we want to spin that business off, we decide at some point that there's more value in selling that business to a for-profit company, having civil service employees could complicate that activity because they don't work for for-profit companies. Civil service is a public entity employment classification. The corollary in private business is a union. So, you know, I don't know how how you would transition employees that if we sold the business, for example, and this is purely hypothetical. We sold the business to a Time Warner or to AT&T or whoever, and came with a bunch of employees that were civil service. Well, they have civil service protections, I guess, evaporated.
Anytime the positions are eliminated,
But if we sold the business with the people in the business, it operates.
Question is, everybody in telecom sees a check in the same account, you receive yours from, you receive yours from. And if I was that person and I wanted to test that theory for some reason or another, that would be my first argument. Is that I got my check from the same people that the power company gets their check from, same account, same signature, same everything, then I better be treated exactly like the power company.
We set up a telecom cash account, we would pay out of that money.
No, I'm just saying that would be, in my opinion, a test that would say that you're just trying to do something for the, not benefit of the employee, but for the benefit of the company, if it is, whether it's for benefit to have civil service or not have civil service. Obviously, there must be a benefit not to have civil service. I just think if this same person was doing the same job on the electric side and the civil service.
Except there isn't the same job.
Not exactly, but the same kind of level of education and experience and responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, I do see, but I know that's not something we do.
I just think we're seeing a lot of positions on this type of problem.
Well, and again, it's your prerogative. You can unilaterally make a decision to carve out telecom that we're asking you to do, or you can say, no, we want all employees treated the same way. But it's not, I hear what you're saying about all employees wanting to be treated the same way, but it's your decision.
I understand it's not a decision.
There's no employees that are here lobbying to say, I want to be treated the same way. If we hire people coming to the telecom business that you authorize, with the understanding that they're not going to be civil service, and that's fine under the law.
I think after reading Pat's discussion about this and your counter discussion, if you would like, I kind of agree with Ted just said. I think we may be looking at that.
But I just go, I believe that, I'm a great payers.
Service, since it's a technician, I just think that's the.
I mean, there are things I want to interject, first of all.
Can I make a comment as the business owner?
As the business owner, I would argue.
How dare you?
You're not the business.
I just go, I'll just leave it, huh?
But ratepayers of the business.
Based on what previous.
Right.
Yeah.
commissions have done.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, there are a few things I want to interject. First of all, As the business owner, I would argue that the technicians over there do not consider telecommunications technicians equivalent to them. And I don't know if Tim feels differently about that, but telecommunications technicians, being the entrepreneurial aspect of this company, it is a very different environment for them. And they are working with technologies, their positions are evolving, the demands on their jobs are evolving almost daily, where a water tech pretty much does what a water tech has done probably the last 10 years. I don't know, tell me if I'm out of line with this at all, Tim, but electrical tech has a pretty well-defined job, and that's what that job is, and probably will remain that job for the next 10, 20 years. These telecom techs, we're setting a precedent for an entire division of this group that is going to continually evolve. For the fiber to home business, I need these guys to work on commercial installations, new technology coming in, residential installations, and I really can't have restrictions that would say, I'm sorry, you can't hire the most qualified candidate because they felt they didn't want to take the civil service test, or this test doesn't even exist right now. We're going to have to create a specialized test because it really doesn't exist. None of my telecom peers in the state, from my understanding, have any kind of civil service requirements. So I'm just speaking as the business owner trying to operate in a very entrepreneurial environment. You're trying to put very legacy, very old constraints on an environment that is not that way. They're not the same thing.
Now,
At the end of the day, it's still your decision on what you want to do.
Because I communications, I feel a little bit of that, and it is different. So much evolving.
But I guess, take Chris' argument, I mean, Tim and Kev, everybody got the same argument that we can't qualify people for civil service. If that's your argument, then we should do it across the board.
I would be favor of that, but that's your choice.
You're gonna get back to singling out a single position, and then, because if you want to argue the merits and non-merits of civil service, I'll open and have that discussion, do what I told them. I'm just not interested.
Pat, what would happen,
Singling one position.
what would happen from a legal perspective if we decided to go away from civil service? What would happen with existing employees that are civil service?
They're all grandfathered in. As long as it's
You just say that these new and future employees will be in
positions that are
there'd be a lengthy transition until retirement, then you'd be away from it. It'd be a couple decades.
Well, actually, I was just going to mention that if the commission is really hung up on the technician title, the other plausible solution is to rename this telecommunications specialist. Pretty much the same.
Chris, have you thought about changing the title to telecommunications engineer?
Well, actually, I was just going to mention that if the commission is really hung up on the technician title, the other plausible solution is to rename this telecommunications specialist. Pretty much the same things as I've described in the job description, but there would not be that direct contrast to, well, they're technicians over there. Well, you're a telecom specialist. If that's the type of thing that we need to do to move this forward, I'm certainly open to that.
And I think we've talked about that, haven't we? I thought there were issues associated with.
Well, my issue was well, I don't know what the term they use, but basically it's the same job, you're just changing the title. The key here is that what you had quoted on technicians is there's a couple things you can look at. There are guidelines that we looked at in 2010 that said if it's not managerial, or if it is managerial, professional, or highly technical, we would recommend to the commission it's non-civil service. But it didn't mean hourly, and then when you look at the law, the KRS statute, you could, and Pat might help us out with this if I'm quoting wrong, please let me know. You could take one, like say a maintenance position at the power plant, that whole entire classification is civil service. But then in another portion of the business side, that whole classification is non-civil service. You have the purview to look at that classification of position. So if it is a different position, you have the right to do it. I don't think we have a little bit of what you're calling more fair and consistent. But I think by KRS statutes, the way I understand it, as long as that's a different classification of position, you have the right to afford it, civil service protection or not. Am I wrong in that, Pat?
You do it by classification.
And this is a different classification.
And I know we've said that this is a single position, but this is setting a precedent for a growing piece of our business. So however this gets classified has certain strong future implications.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where the comments that you guys have made. one of the things that I have concerns about is that this remaining the civil service or becoming the civil service division. As you know, we've talked about the fact that as we retire units at Elmer Smith, we go to RA and beta breeding. We have a number of qualified employees that could be trained to do the work that Chris needs, but may have difficulties passing the test, or may not choose to take the test, to qualify, and we will effectively eliminate them from consideration in helping us to achieve the reduction that we're seeing coming up in attrition by moving people around. I think it takes away an option that we have, a tool in our tool chest, so to speak, on how to manage that attrition issue as well. And you know, I've heard, despite the fact that I think Pat has provided some information to the contrary, I do believe that the civil service requirements limit the population of people that are available as employees or potential employees to OMU. There are a lot of very talented people that just don't test for it. And they don't sit for things.
I believe that to be the case. I mean, I work also with our communication tax. I'm not sure they would consider it.
I agree. But all I'm saying, Tony, is that here's an opportunity that you have to make a change that doesn't affect people that are, even if we change the whole organization, would be grandfathered. You can make a change now, here, going forward in this division, and resolve that issue. And it's within your prerogative to do that.
This is the first time I've heard you say that you all had considered naming this something other than a technician position. What were the discussions there? I mean, my work representative of the commission before, that we had
We did it between the last two meetings, so this was the first time we've met.
First time we've met, okay.
But that was definitely an option on Terry's tables, to look at it, expand, look at the job description, and see if you want to title it something different. And of course, going back to the guidelines, you need to look at something like a specialist. That's fine. It's doing the same job, which is exactly what Tony, I think, would say, is that it's doing the same job, and you can call it what you want. It's more of an hourly, lower pay grade position, and it should be afforded, I'm thinking where he's going, it should be afforded civil service staff.
I kind of hung up on the word technician because, someone says, Tim, Kevin, and we have certain people work underneath them, they're called technicians, and I don't know exactly what's the difference in their ability to.
It's a broad
Fair point, but I don't think, Dr. Maddox, I don't think it addresses the underlying issue that we're trying to get you guys to understand. I don't care if you call them bottle washer or whatever.
That's the verification, but all kinds of tests,
We could do that, and I would support that. I don't know, I think the employee, what is it, the Civil Service Association probably would want to weigh in on that as well.
Just my counsel on that, if we're going to actually entertain, looking at removing civil service or dispositioning away from civil service, whatever that terminology might be, that we take some time and truly look at that transition at a holistic level, not at a piecemeal level. Piecemeal level scares me too. And that's where I have to sit down with Pat and probably even understand it better myself, get with the city and figure out how they went away. At this point, I don't think I will recommend it, but if that's the option that you want us to pursue, of course we can look at it.
I just like to do something other than what we've done before.
Well, there's really no motion on the floor right now.
Then you can make it, you can right now make it civil service, non-civil service, we move forward, or you can tell us that you can't move forward until you figure out the bigger picture.
It's hard for me to think that I'm smart enough that in a 30-minute conversation, we can move out of this. It's taking us this long to get to where we are. I think it takes a whole lot more study. That's far. And I can see your point, what you're trying to do.
What if we call this
What you're trying to
specialist?
accomplish
It sounds like if we call it a specialist, then there's no issues.
You call him a scientist, you call him.
You can call anybody an engineer, call it not an engineer. Well said by an engineer. Ronnie, is that an accurate? That's true.
I'm kind of wondering, are we tying Chris's hands and getting this position filled?
Yes.
If you look at the
That's
big
the
picture.
problem. Ultimately,
I mean,
that's
that's
the
what I'm
problem.
wondering about if we-
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
and look,
Aren't there some urgency in this position?
Not an emergency, but.
I'll say
Well, certainly,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
things out there that we have to.
So I think you look at them as two separate issues.
Our telecom, our fiber to the home program that we're getting ready to, start looking at customers on, looks like it's gonna be very successful. And so, we're probably gonna be expanding that operation because it's gonna be successful in other areas as well. And so, yeah, we need to get this person on board sooner rather than later. And we'd like to not have that constraint. Civil service requires us to test to get that person on board.
You feel like in any way that's going to open up the can of worms from the Civil Service Commission to come in and reevaluate this and
Civil service, you mean a commission or association?
Association.
Association, we don't have, we don't barter with them or anything of that nature. But yeah, they could definitely file some form of a complaint or that might cause more of what I would consider to be a morale issue. But I don't think it would.
We're talking about the one position?
The one position. No one's called me from the association or any civil service employees. I've had a bunch of people inquire about why the position's on hold, and I've definitely explained it to them why it's on hold. I don't know.
Can you go through the civil service, advertise, do your testing, then you will use the training?
I can ask for a waiver of test.
You decided not qualified.
Yes, if I go through all bands that have passed the test.
So Chris is only speculating he can't find anything based on his experience. That doesn't mean you couldn't actually put an application and find somebody qualified.
I just stated, and I want to be on the record, I want the most qualified candidate, regardless of their thoughts.
I'm saying, but you're speculating that they won't, that civil service is hampering that.
Well, I know it's hampering, I know what it is hampering. It's hampering potentially qualified employees that we have, whose positions ultimately will most likely be eliminated through technology. Automated meter reading and or
You're saying they
retirement.
can't pass the test.
I'm saying that in some cases, people have told us that they will not sit for the test.
that's a joke.
But please
I mean,
understand.
I'm sorry, okay, all right, it's for life.
Saying he can't, he's trying to qualify.
But please understand too, because we have lots of civil service, very qualified civil service employees. So yes, the process can yield excellent employees, of which we have a lot. It just gives, and you've been through it. It just sometimes you might not be able to get exactly what you want, and that's perfectly fine. So there's kind of mentioned some of the pitfalls as far as this being more of an entrepreneurial business and how you can, it's more conducive to, being at will is more conducive to today's environment. But we understand that the positives and the pitfalls of civil service.
So, it's on the agenda, as a discussion item, we either choose to take action or not take action. I think we would like you to take action so that we can get this person on board. You can always say it's gonna be civil service and then come back later and make it a non-civil service position.
But if you do that.
That person's grandfather. Yes. After they're hired.
Yes, and there's a year,
And they elect.
there's a year probationary period, so I don't know how that would work. For grandfather.
Well, I came in thinking that I was just gonna leave it like it is, it's a civil service position, but Chris's enthusiasm for this and the timeframe and administrations, it seems like you're all really unified. There's no discussion where you're not unified, it doesn't sound like to me. So I'd like to make a motion, we make this a non-civil service position. I'll do a second, that's fine. At least we got a motion on the floor to go up or down.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No.
Okay, motion does not carry, so you want to, someone else want to make
What if
it-
we change the name of specialist, don't go back to it? If the title was specialist, would we have this issue? Well, it wouldn't change the job description at all.
the section, so it's no action.
That's more than finance the other way.
What if we change the name to specialist? I'll go back to, if the title was specialist, wouldn't we have this issue?
I would have to see how, I'd have to see how that job description reads compared to
Okay,
that.
well, it wouldn't change the job description at all, so.
It reads the same.
That's just semantics.
And that's effectively why.
But is that kind of what we're sort of talking about? Maybe.
All right, well, we will table this and be back to you next month, unfortunately. So we will, that means we'll have to stop our hiring process until you guys make a decision.
There was no, just make sure I understand. Did one of you two make a motion? There was no
I
second?
made a motion, so those seconds, no action.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Where are we in the process? We advertised the position.
I've got all the resumes. We have notified every single candidate that submitted a resume, and have told them the position is on hold for further months. So we want to at least make sure we did that.
What did the ad say? Did you say one way or the other?
It said, well, see, the advertisement is the key. It's the crossroad. Either advertise for a test or advertise to submit resumes. We advertise to submit resumes. So if you decide it's civil service, which is perfectly fine, I'll notify all these candidates to put in an application for a test.
Can you ask those candidates individually if they would still be interested in civil service?
Sure. You're not gonna call 100 people, but yeah. I wouldn't have a problem doing it if that's what you want to do. And from an HR perspective, we could staff it either way. No problem.
Well, I'm sensitive to Chris, people who not comfortable with it.
Just seems like it's a little bit of a slippery slope.
I can understand that.
We can discuss it if we.
We'll try to provide you some additional information to help you make a decision. Unfortunately, Chris, maybe we could hire a temporary or something to get moving. With some, maybe we could look at the resumes and see if there's a temporary, someone qualified that we could hire as a temporary that might either sit for the test or be willing to interview for the permanent position. And that way we get somebody on board. Does that sound right to you? All right.
Yeah, I think Chris is doing a great job in communication with the Black River, but sounds like everything's going well. I mean, I personally, everything would be the progress.